Okay, so have you ever noticed how some people just seem to, like, pick up new languages so easily?
Oh, yeah.
Like kids especially.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're just little sponges soaking it all up.
It really is. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. And it can be a little discouraging when you're an adult trying to learn a new language.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're, slogging through mud.
Yeah, you feel like you're in quicksand or something, and
Yes.
everyone else is just gliding through.
Right. But for this deep dive, we're actually going to look beyond those assumptions.
Okay.
We're digging into some really interesting academic research on how people learn languages
Cool.
beyond childhood.
Yeah.
And what the research says might actually surprise you.
Really?
Yeah, so no more of this, like, kids are naturals, adults are doomed narrative.
I like it because it is kind of like the common perception.
Totally.
Like out there, that
Yeah.
once you're past a certain age, you've missed the boat.
Right, you miss your chance.
Yeah.
But the reality is way more nuanced and honestly a lot more encouraging
I'm glad to hear that.
than you might think.
Yeah. I think we could all use a little bit of encouragement in the language learning department.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's so cool about this research
Yeah.
is that it's not just about age.
Okay.
It's about understanding all these different factors that come into play
Okay.
when we're talking about language acquisition.
Yeah, because it's definitely not one size fits all.
Right, exactly.
Everyone's got their own unique path.
Exactly. And one of the biggest factors that kind of sets adults apart from those babbling babies is that we already speak at least one language,
That's true.
which, seems obvious.
Yeah, you think so.
But we don't always think about that.
Right. It's like we forget that we already have this whole system
Yeah,
in place.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that existing knowledge of how language works, the grammar, the syntax, like the whole 9 yards, can actually be a huge asset
It's true.
in language learning.
It's like you've already got the blueprint.
Right.
You're just slotting in new vocabulary, tweaking the design a bit.
It's like we've got a head start in some ways.
Exactly.
That's kind of a nice way to think about it.
Yeah, but
Instead of like,
here's the catch.
I know there's a but coming.
There's always a catch, right?
Always a catch.
But that existing blueprint that we have can also lead to some interference.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about those moments when you're like trying to construct a sentence in a new language
Oh, yeah.
and your brain just like keeps wanting to fall back
On what,
on your native language's patterns.
Totally. It's like my brain turns into this grammar battlefield.
Yeah,
Like, no, you have to do it this way.
You know better.
Yeah.
You've been here before.
Exactly.
And that's where things get really interesting because the research starts to unpack how our development as adults are awesome problem-solving skills.
Which we're very proud of, by the way.
Right, of course.
Adults.
Our love of analysis, how all of that can actually be both a blessing and a curse when it comes to language learning.
Okay. I'm very intrigued. Break that down for me. How can being good at logic and critical thinking, which, like, we kind of pride ourselves on as adults,
Yeah.
how can that hold us back when it comes to learning a language?
So I want you to think about young children for a second.
Okay.
They are not bogged down by like consciously analyzing every single grammar rule.
They're just going with the flow.
Exactly. They're just absorbing language through immersion and play.
Yeah.
And there's actually a growing body of research that suggests that this implicit intuitive way of learning might be tapping into some really powerful brain mechanisms
Okay.
that become less accessible as we age.
So that's where I've heard this whole critical period idea come up.
Right.
Like, if you don't become fluent by, like, age 5, you're just destined to, like, forever order coffee with a questionable accent.
Right. Well, thankfully, it's not quite that dramatic.
Okay, good.
But the critical period hypothesis is definitely a cornerstone of this research.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth unpacking a little bit because it can be easy to misinterpret.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there.
Totally. About what it really means.
Absolutely.
For language learners.
And that's where understanding the nuances of this research can be so empowering for learners of all ages.
Okay. So let's dive into this whole critical period thing.
Okay.
Is it really like a window that slams shut?
Okay.
Or is it a little more nuanced than that?
Yeah, I like to think of it less like a window slamming shut and more like a path in the woods.
Okay. I like that.
So when we're young, that path is like wide open.
Yeah.
It's well-trodden. We're absorbing language effortlessly,
Right.
almost unconsciously, just through exposure and interaction.
It's like effortless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as we get older,
Yeah.
that path, it might get a little overgrown. It's not that it disappears entirely,
Right.
but we might need to put in a bit more effort to navigate it.
So it's still there.
Exactly. It's still there.
Okay.
And that's actually where those amazing adult brains come in handy,
Oh, good.
right?
Tell me more.
We might not have that same effortless absorption.
Yeah. But we can compensate with strategy, analysis, and
Well,
just sheer determination.
we love a good strategy.
Right.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Good.
Because I was thinking, okay, so younger learners, they might have an easier time with like pronunciation
Yeah.
or grammar,
Mm-hmm.
just like implicitly picking it up.
Right.
But adults, we can like leverage our cognitive skills
Yes.
to actually like consciously learn those things.
Exactly. And let's be real, there's something incredibly satisfying
Oh, yeah.
about like cracking the code of a new
Definitely.
grammar rule or finally nailing that tricky pronunciation.
It really is.
It's a different kind of learning,
Yeah,
but it's just as valid and just as rewarding.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these different pathways happening at different ages.
Right.
I mean, is there any way for adults to like reawaken those earlier,
Right.
more intuitive learning mechanisms, or are we kind of stuck on the overgrown path?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And while there isn't a magic switch to instantly revert back to childhood language acquisition,
Darn.
right?
Okay.
The research does suggest that there are things we can do to create the right conditions for our brains to learn languages more effectively regardless of age.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about creating these ideal conditions.
Right.
Because if it doesn't involve time travel or brain transplants, I'm here for it.
Well, I hate to disappoint you on the time travel front,
Okay.
but one really fascinating area of research looks at the impact of our learning environment.
Okay, so environment. So like, does it matter if I'm sitting on a beach with my French textbook versus like at my cluttered desk at home?
Well, a beach setting probably wouldn't hurt,
Right.
but it goes a little deeper than that.
Okay.
So think about it this way. When do we see the most natural, effortless language acquisition?
With kids.
Exactly.
Little kids.
And they're not usually learning by like sitting through grammar drills
Yeah.
or memorizing flashcards.
They're just like living their life.
Right. Exactly. They're learning through constant exposure,
Yeah.
real life interactions, and importantly, play.
They're picking it up from their environment.
Yes.
Their family, their friends.
Exactly. And they're not afraid to make mistakes.
Which is key.
Yes, their mistakes are actually seen as a natural part of the process.
Which we'll get into later, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so there's something about that immersion,
Yes.
that freedom to experiment,
Right.
that feels really key here.
Uh-huh.
But we can't just like rewind back to preschool
Right.
and hope for the best.
If only.
Right.
Right.
So how do we translate those principles
Right.
into something that works for, grown-up life
A
with
big-
jobs and, responsibilities and all of that?
You're right. It's all about adapting those principles
I'll
to
say.
our adult lives. And thankfully, the research offers some really practical insights into how we can do that.
Okay, give me the good stuff.
All right. So one area that's particularly fascinating is this concept of modified input.
Modified input.
Modified input.
Okay, am I picturing some sort of like Matrix-style language download?
Not quite,
Okay.
but I appreciate your enthusiasm.
Okay.
So modified input refers to how we adjust our language when we're speaking to someone who is learning.
Oh, so you mean like when you start speaking really slowly and loudly
Well,
to someone when you realize they don't speak your language?
while well-intentioned,
Right.
simply increasing the volume doesn't magically unlock language comprehension.
Right, of course not.
But think about it more like using simpler vocabulary,
Okay.
speaking at a slightly slower pace,
Right.
emphasizing key words, and maybe using more gestures
Right.
to help get the meaning across.
Like charades.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's kind of like what we call foreigner talk.
Right.
I know it can feel a little awkward sometimes,
Yeah.
but there's actually a method to the madness.
So there's a reason why we do this.
Yes, because the research suggests that this modified input, even if it feels simplified,
Yeah.
can actually help learners process language more effectively.
That makes sense.
Especially in the early stages, it's
Yeah.
like building a bridge
Right.
between what they already know and this new language they're trying to learn.
Totally. Okay. And I like that you brought up foreigner talk because it's like our brains kind of instinctively switch into that mode
Yes.
when we're talking to someone who's learning the language.
Exactly. And it often involves a bit of linguistic creativity.
Totally. And this reminds me of this funny story
Okay.
about some friends of mine. So these friends of mine, they were traveling in China a few years back,
Okay.
and their Mandarin was a work in progress, shall we say.
Right.
And they were trying to ask their tour guide
Uh-huh.
about these historical temples.
Okay.
But the tour guide's English was pretty much non-existent.
Oh, no.
So you can kind of see where this is going.
Yeah, communication breakdown, central.
Total charades situation.
Oh, my God.
They were like speaking slower, louder, using every hand gesture they could think of,
Right?
but like nothing was getting through. And then in a moment of pure desperation, the tour guide grabs a stick and starts drawing Chinese characters in the sand.
You're kidding.
I'm not even kidding.
That's amazing.
I know it sounds like something out of a movie,
It does.
but it totally worked.
Wow.
The second he started drawing, it just clicked for everyone.
Wow.
And it just goes to show that this whole modified input thing,
Yeah.
it's not just some like theoretical concept.
Right.
It's something that happens organically
Yeah.
in real life,
Right.
in these like unexpected ways.
It shows how adaptable our brains are
Yes.
when it comes to communication.
Exactly.
And I think it also highlights how important
yeah,
like visual cues and context can be
totally.
in language learning.
Right, because it's not just about memorizing vocabulary and grammar.
Exactly.
It's about that connection,
Right.
that creativity.
It's about embracing those moments of like linguistic improvisation.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's such an empowering message for language learners because it kind of takes the pressure off
Yes.
of needing to be perfect from the get-go.
Absolutely. Because when we let go of that pressure, we open ourselves up to so much more learning and growth.
Right, because if we're so afraid of making a mistake,
Exactly.
then we're never going to say anything.
Exactly. And those mistakes are so valuable. They're
Yeah.
opportunities to learn and grow.
Right, and I think that's something that kids are really good at.
They embrace those mistakes.
They do. They don't even see them as mistakes. They're just like, oh, that's how you say it.
Exactly. They're just experimenting and playing with the language.
Exactly, and I think as adults, we can learn a lot from that.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to kind of bring it back to our listeners
Okay.
and just kind of pose this question.
Yeah.
How can understanding all of this empower you on your own language learning journey?
That's a great question. And I think it really comes down to recognizing that learning a language, it's a journey, not a race.
I love that.
It's about embracing the process, the challenges, and yes, even the mistakes.
The mistakes, because those mistakes are not failures.
Exactly.
They're opportunities to learn.
Yes, and I think the research that we've explored today offers a really hopeful message.
It does.
No matter your age or your background,
Right.
your brain is wired for language learning.
It
It's
is
never too late to start.
never too late to start.
And there are so many pathways to success.
So if you've ever felt intimidated or discouraged
Right.
by this idea of learning a new language,
Yeah.
I hope this deep dive has given you a renewed sense of possibility.
Me too. Embrace the journey, be kind to yourself, and never underestimate the incredible learning capacity of your amazing brain.
I love that. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive on language learning.
It's been fun.
Happy language learning, everyone.